good enough. I think most people. I think
Okay,
that most people should agree. I
welcome to
think
our New
most
York
people should.
Giants Preservation Society meeting for tonight, February 20th, 2025, with Robert Cohen. Robert's going to be discussing, should be a lively discussion tonight, the 50 greatest players in New York slash San Francisco Giants history. Uh, Before we do that, I'd like to uh, take care of some business. First of all, we have Giant royalty in here. Barbara Schneider, Melot's daughter, is here. Barbara, always a pleasure when you show up here, so thank you.
Thank you.
Next week we have it'll be a Wednesday meeting with Richard Quickie. Richard will be discussing Barbara's father, Mel Ott, as we near his birthday, I believe, Barbara, March 2nd.
Yes.
There you go, March 2nd. Um, so that meeting will be next Wednesday. Many of you heard my mom passed away last Tuesday, and some of you have sent me cards, emails, whatever. So much love and thank you for whoever you know who you are is basically. I did not send out a death notice on an email, so you know that.
It's not
Um,
working.
George, please mute yourself. Uh, I got an email from a gentleman. If anybody knows any information on Dummy Taylor, please forward it to me. Very early 20th century. Um, After next week, March will be devoted to the San Francisco Giants and spring training. We're going to have a Monday meeting with Maria Gordato. Barry Bloom will be speaking. Hopefully, Susan Slusser and then Roger Munter, who knows everything about the Giants farm system, will also speak. Before we turn it over to Robert, Norm Coleman has something he'd like to say.
So
Norm, all yours.
as most of you know, I was interviewed on the Sweet Spot on Sunday, and I know some of you tried to log in, and there were glitches, so not everyone was able to get in. Um, the host did send me a link to the video if you want to see it. Um, Once again, there were some glitches with the link. If you try to click the link and log on and you can't get onto the video, just copy the link and then paste it into Google Chrome and you should be able to get into it. I will send the link to Gary so he can send it to you.
That's great.
Gary, can I just ask you one thing?
Absolutely, Steve.
Quick thing. How are you set financially now with the group here?
We're doing okay. I got some contributions from some people.
Okay.
So anybody who contributed money knew they got a phone call.
Okay.
So you got a phone call, so thank you. And why don't we all welcome Robert Cohen to the New York Giants Preservation Society. We're going to run things a little differently tonight. Robert doesn't really want to talk about his book. He'd rather me interview him, which I will, and then we'll open up the floor to everybody. Robert, you have written this book. It's not a new book, but you've also written countless others on different teams, baseball, football, so basketball one, hockey, duos. Why don't you first tell us about yourself before we move on to that?
Well, Gary, I think you've already provided a lot of the people my professional writing background. So let me tell you about my early years as a baseball fan. I grew up in the Bronx during the 1960s, rooting for the Yankees, but the Giants were my second team. And it was kind of ironic because even though I was in the Bronx, most of my classmates and friends were Mets fans. And I think that was probably because it hadn't really been that long since the Giants and Dodgers had moved to California. So a lot of the kids in my class had parents who were either Giants or Dodgers fans. So Willie Mays was like an idol to a lot of my classmates. And I remained a Yankees fan for many years. But in more recent times, I've become more of a baseball historian. I don't really root as much for one particular team. I just kind of follow the sport and the history of the game, which I really began following as a young boy. Short time after my father purchased the baseball encyclopedia. I just went through the book and was reading all about all these, looking at all the numbers of these statistics of these great players, and I just became a fan of the history of the game. So really, my uh, my life as a baseball historian began when I was a little boy.
So Robert, what made you delve into all of these 50 greatest of various teams and of various sports?
I wrote a handful of books when I first started writing professionally about a little over 20 years ago. But then I decided I might be interesting to start a series of books on some of the most iconic franchises in the history of professional sports. So I started off with the Yankees and Red Sox, but then I gradually started doing some books on other teams. So I went into football. I've got a number of football books as well. And I think I did my Giants book about 8 or 9 years ago. I just felt it was time to do a book on a team that was one of the most historic franchises in the history of professional sports.
Wonderful. Now we all know that this book is without a doubt your favorite. Which one would be next that you really enjoyed, delving into?
Well, obviously, growing up a Yankees fan, that was my number one. But even though I don't really like the Red Sox, they're one of my favorite books to do. I just enjoy writing about the most historic teams like the Yankees, the Giants, the Dodgers, Red Sox. I just recently finished one on the Cincinnati Reds, and that was a very interesting one because they had so many great players in their history. But the Giants and Dodgers were interesting, and particularly interesting because those were the two of the teams that I split the book into New York and California teams. So I have like two. When I list my greatest Giants teams at the end of the book, I have one for the New York Giants and one for the San Francisco Giants, and I do a combined one at the end.
Wonderful. So you did all of these books. There had to be some kind of how you determine the rankings of these players. Could you explain how you went about doing that?
Sure. I looked at a number of factors which were basically to determine the overall level of dominance a player attained during his years with that team. And I should preface this by saying that I only looked at a player's time with the Giants when formulating my rankings. So a Hall of Fame pitcher like Gaylord Perry, while he made the list, he might not rank as quite as high as one might expect because he also pitched for other teams, had several of his greatest seasons for other teams. But then I was trying to basically determine his overall level of dominance. So I looked at things like how a player fared in the annual MVP and or Cy Young voting, how many times he made the All-Star team, how often he led the league in the major statistical category. Then I looked at his overall level of statistical compilation. So I looked at where he ranks in team annals in the various statistical categories. And I also looked at how he improved the fortunes of the ball club during his time with the Giants.
Wonderful. Now, for the audience, out of the 50 Giant franchise players who made this list, 28 are New York Giants, 20 are San Francisco Giants, and 2 played for the New York Giants and the San Francisco Giants. Robert, now the book was written a little while back. I don't know if you're still following the Giants. Would there be anybody you feel would be considered to be replacing somebody in the book?
I'm not sure about that. I might have altered the rankings a little bit if it had gone beyond 2016, I think is when I wrote the book. So a player like Madison Bumgarner or Buster Posey might be a little higher on the list than he is. But I don't know if I would necessarily replace anybody.
Gotcha. I'm going to read everybody the top 10 that Robert listed, and then I'm going to ask Robert to maybe read or talk about one of his favorite New York Giants and one of his favorite San Francisco Giants. So this is the top 10, according to Robert Cohen. Number 10, Frankie Frisch. Number 9, Orlando Cepeda. 8, Bill Terry. Number 7, Carl Hubble. Number 6, Willie McCovey. Number 5, Mel Ott. Number 4, Juan Marichal. 3, Christy Mathewson. 2, Barry Bonds. And number 1, Marvin Bernard. Oh, sorry about that. Willie Mays. Robert, why don't you tell us about, some of your favorites who were on that list? If you want to give us a clue, maybe 1 or 2 New York Giants, 1 or 2 San Francisco Giants.
Okay, well, I guess I should start at the top with Willie Mays. I think everyone's aware of what a great all-around player he was, but some of the most interesting things about him were that he was such an intelligent player that some people may not realize that. I saw an interview with him once where he said that after Herman Franks became manager of the Giants during the mid-'60s, Franks told him that basically he would manage the team from the dugout, but he wanted Mays to manage the team on the field. He had so much trust in his judgment. And then I remember Mays also saying that there were several times during his career where he could have stretched a single into a double or stolen a base, but he elected to stay at first because he knew that if he took second, the opposing team would walk Willie McCovey behind him. So he really took the whole game he had the whole game played out in his mind. He was a very intelligent ball player. Moving on to Christy Mathewson at number 3, a lot of people consider him to be the greatest pitcher in National League history. He won 373 games over the course of his career. 13 times he won at least 20 games, and 4 times he won at least 30 games. And of course, he had arguably the greatest feat in the history of the World Series in 1905, when the Giants beat the Philadelphia Athletics in 5 games. He pitched 3 complete game shutouts over a 6-day period, which is pretty awesome when you think about it.
Absolutely.
And one of my favorite players in franchise history is Juan Marichal, who I consider to be one of the most underappreciated and underrated great pitchers in the history of the game. When you look at his numbers, they compare very favorably to those of Bob Gibson, who receives far more credit over the course of in these historical rankings. My opinion is that Marichal was the equal of Bob Gibson. Maybe not any better, but certainly his equal. He won more games, 191 during the 1960s, than any other pitcher in the game. 6 times he won at least 20 games, and 3 times he won at least 25 games. And if you listen to the players who competed during that era, they will tell you that he was as hard to hit as anybody in the game, including Koufax and Gibson. The thing that made him so hard to hit was the fact that he threw about 4 or 5 pitches, but he threw them from 3 different angles. So he basically had 15 pitches in his repertoire. And he was a phenomenal pitcher. He tremendous stamina. He pitched that 18-inning shutout against 18 innings or 16 innings against Warren Spahn in 1962. Just a great pitcher. Now Mel Ott, when he retired at the end of the 1947 season, he had National League records for most home runs, runs batted in, runs scored, and walks. He was a 6-time National League batting champion, doing that when he was only 5'9" and 170 pounds. And he hit at least 30 home runs 8 times, knocked in 100 runs or more 9 times, and also scored 100 or more runs 9 times. Now, it's true that he hit up almost 2/3 of his home runs in the Polo Grounds with the short right field wall, but he was still a great home run hitter. And he made Ted Williams' list of the 20 greatest hitters of all time, so that says something for him as well. Carl Hubble, only National League pitcher to win Most Valuable Player Award twice. He did that in 1933 and 1936. And between 1936 and 1937, he set a major league record by winning 24 consecutive decisions. Of course, everybody knows about his 1934 All-Star game, where he struck out Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig, Jimmy Fox, Al Simmons, and Joe Cronin in succession. And he was just a phenomenal pitcher. Putting him a couple notches behind Juan Marichal wasn't easy. It was I I had to deliberate on that for a while, but I saw Marischal's, that was just kind of why I put him just ahead. Now, Bill Terry, he led all major league players during the 1930s with a 352 batting average. The last National League player to hit 400 batted 401 in 1930 when he also set a National League record by getting 254 hits. That basically covers my top 10. If you want me to go further down, I can do that now or
You
later.
didn't mention McCovey.
Oh, William McCovey, yes, William McCovey. Well, he was arguably the most feared hitter in the National League for much of the 1960s. He spent his first few years with the Giants platooning against right-handed pitching because the Giants had right-handed hitters like Orlando Cepeda and Felipe Alou who were outstanding. But once McCovey established himself as a full-time starter in 1963, he tied Hank Aaron that year for the National League home run title. And over the course of the next 7 or 8 years, he was a dominant hitter. National League MVP in 1969, and between 1968 and 1970. I believe he led the National League in slugging percentage all 3 years. He was just a dominant hitter. Now,
Robert, I don't mind. Do you want me to read the 50? I'll just read them if you want me to.
You could if you like.
Okay. Does everybody want me to do that? Okay, I see a lot of head shake. One other thing before I do the top 50. Does anybody know the 2 Giants who played in New York and San Francisco that Robert has on his list?
Willie Mays.
Yeah. Jim?
Antonelli.
Darrell Spencer.
Johnny Antonelli.
There you go. Johnny Antonelli.
Darrell
and
Spencer.
Johnny Antonelli and Willie Mays.
Gary, before
Yes.
you read off the top 50, I'd like to know if anyone has any major issues with my top 10 or if they would agree with them or disagree in any way.
I thought McCovey would be ranked a little bit higher.
By the way, Darrell Spencer played in New York and San Francisco.
He's not a top 50 on this list.
Oh, okay. I see.
All right. I'm not going to say the number. I'm just going to go and actually, I will say the note. Number 1, Mays, 2, Bonds, 3, Mathewson, 4, Marischal, 5, Ott, 6, McCovey, 7, Hubble, 8, Terry, 9, Cepeda, 10, Frisch, 11, Kent, 12, McGinnity, 13, Will Clark, 14, Ross Youngs, 15, Johnny Mize, 16, Matt Williams, 17, George High Pockets Kelly, 18, Travis Jackson, 19, Bobby Bonds, 20, George Burns, 21, Freddie Lindstrom, 22, Gaylord Perry, 23, Larry Doyle, 24, Buster Posey, 25, Hal Schumacher, 26, Madison Bumgarner, 27, Tim Lincecum, 28, Irish Musiel, 29, Jeff Testro. I'm mispronouncing that. I'm sorry. 30, Freddie Fitzsimmons. 31, Rube Marquardt. 32, Bobby Thompson. 33, Alvin Dark. 34, Pablo Sandoval. 35, Jack Clark. 36, JoJo Moore. 37, Brooks Wiltsey. 38, JT Snow. 39, Jim Ray Hart. 40, Kevin Mitchell. 41, Rob Nen. 42, Roger Bresnahan. 43, Larry Jansen. 44, Art Fletcher. 45, Monty Irvin. 46, Don Mueller. 47, Rich Aurilia. 48, Rod Beck. 49, Johnny Antonelli. And 50, Sal Magley.
Where's McCovey on that list?
Number 6.
Number 6.
Before I open it up, Robert, the reason I asked you about maybe reconsidering the list, because there is one player who I feel definitely belongs on this, and that would be Brandon Crawford, who will arguably go down as the greatest shortstop in San Francisco Giants history. That's just my opinion. I don't know.
What hurts that is the batting average.
I'm sorry?
what hurts Brandon Crawford is his lifetime batting average compared to, let's say, Travis Jackson.
Well, there's a good chance that he's going to have his number retired by the Giants. I would think so.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I would like that to happen.
Robert, do you want to add anything before we open it up?
Well, one player I did want to discuss a little bit was Monty Irvin.
That'd be wonderful because
Yeah.
a lot of fans in it.
So-
And by the way, Robert, you mentioned about Herman Franks
Yes.
talking about Willie Mays. Harvey, go ahead. Unmute, Harvey.
What? No, Gary, I didn't. What am I supposed to say now?
You're supposed to say like you usually do about his sixth tool.
Oh yeah. Well,
You mean
but
2050?
Robert actually covered that. But we labeled a long time ago that Willie had at least 6 tools. The sixth being his intelligence. Norm filled it out to about 8. But I don't know what we're up to. But seriously, I thought, Robert, you did a good job in explaining how Willie was the on-field manager. And so without the label of the number of tools he had, I think you covered it. How's that, Gary?
Sounds
Good.
great because his baseball acumen was second to none.
Second to none.
That's
Absolutely.
correct. Mars, you're up.
Well, that was interesting, Robert. I must say that growing up in the 40s and 50s, my pop taught me how to bat left-handed and throw left-handed, principally because of his idol Mellott and Bill Terry and of course Carl Hubble were his favorite players. And he spoke to me about them. He worked as a vendor for Harry M. Stevens in the Polo Grounds and Yankee Stadium. So he saw the Giants in 33 when he worked there, 1933. And he got to see Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig on the other side of the river. So, but the question I have for you, Robert, talking about, you mentioned earlier when you first came on about the purist. Well, how do you feel about the credibility and the integrity of the steroid issue records?
It upsets me. I know Frank Robinson once said that it bothered him very much that people he knew were on steroids were passing him on the all-time home run list. I feel slightly differently about the Hall of Fame voting, though. I do believe that players such as Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire, who never would have accomplished what they did without using steroids, they should never come close to getting into the Hall of Fame. However, a player like Barry Bonds or Roger Clemens, as despicable as I may personally find them to be, they were great players before they started using steroids. So I think
Agreed.
they should be viewed a little bit differently. I'm not saying they should be in or they shouldn't be, but I think that the members of the Veterans Committee and the Hall of Fame, they should be considering them for the Hall of Fame in the future. I wouldn't necessarily automatically discount them, but I think that the other players, Gary Sheffield's another one who I don't think should be in the should smell the Hall of Fame. I think
Who is that? Who?
Gary Sheffield.
Oh, okay.
I think he's another one who achieved what he did because of the use of steroids. But the
Well,
ones who were great. Yes,
I was
go
going to say,
ahead.
let me take it one step further.
Oh, come on.
If you're going to say Bonds and Clemens should be in the Hall,
No, I didn't say they should be in. I said I think that they should be seriously considered for the Hall of Fame.
okay, well, let's take it one step further. If you're going to go that far, then you have to also account for Pete Rose and Shoeless Joe Jackson. Don't you agree?
Yes, I think that their cases should be taken to the Veterans Committee as well. I don't think that they should be automatically precluded. Shoeless Joe Jackson, in particular, he was basically an ignorant man who I don't think he fully realized everything he was doing. I think his case, he should be viewed as someone who probably should be in. Now, Pete Rose, I'm not sure. I think once again, the people in the Hall of Fame should determine that. But he was. He's put it this way: he's more deserving than some of the players who There have already been some players who use steroids who are in the Hall of Fame. I believe Mike Piazza used steroids. I believe
Yes. Big
that,
Poppy.
I believe that
Big Poppy.
oh, definitely. That's a joke. That's a joke. And the Astros first baseman, what's his name again?
Bagwell.
Bagwell. He probably used steroids as well. Now, if those players are in, I don't see why some of these other players should not be in.
Well, one last comment is the hypocrisy of baseball. They have gambling now. So they're it's like it's a tremendous hypocrisy in the sport.
Why don't we try to stay on the topic, which is the book, okay? And
Thank you very much.
Mars, if you want to ask more questions after we're done, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you very much, Robert.
Steve,
Okay.
you're up.
Yeah, we talked about the home runs, Mel Ott's home runs. A lot of them said they were Chinese home runs. He termed it chop suey home runs. I think once before. Just to get back to Mays for a second, I was fortunate enough to come into New York, the second championship, and they had the trophy thing at 2013 in January. I was there with my whole family. And of course, Mays was there, and I guess Joe Panic was there, and McGowan was there. And I think that's when it came out. Mays has an amazing home in Atherton, which most of you know. It's valued at almost $7 million, and I guess they kept it. But at that meeting, McGowan was praising Mays, and he said, Willie came to me and said, Peter, I need one more year on my contract. And Peter McGowan said, I don't understand. You have a lifetime contract. I need one more year for May. He felt he was at least 10 years older than her, that he would pass first, and she would need one more year, whatever salary he's making, to make things work. That's a very intelligent thing to do. And McGowan couldn't figure it out. So, yes, six tools, 7 tools, whatever it is. He was there was nothing like him. And I said it before this, the Jim Gilliam book, 1948, Mays was what, 17, maybe 16, going on 17. He was playing for the Black Barons, and Gilliam was playing for the Baltimore Elite Giants, another Negro League team, and they sent him from second on a base hit to center field. And, we know what happened, Mays whirled and threw him out at the plate, like Harvey said, by a long shot. We don't know that, but threw him out. But he was the greatest and obviously number one. Very tough to write a book like that because it's one man's opinion. I was saying to myself, what happened to Sal Magley? Well, he's number 50. We could go back and forth all night. I wouldn't put Jeff Kent 11. I wouldn't put Magley 50. But again, it's one man's opinion. Thank you.
That's what makes this so interesting. It's
correct.
But Robert had the foresight to be the first one to do this, so we're reading his stuff. And Steve, like you said, Mays and Mel Ott, I mean, those were my father's guys. When I was upstate, my father would grab the stickball bat and he would lift his leg up, just like Mel Ott, because that's who he wanted to be. And of course, Willie Mays is Willie Mays. So, Russ, you are up.
All right. Overall, I think the list is excellent, although I have a little difficulty with Johnny Antonelli as far as a San Francisco Giant. He had one good season, one pretty decent season, and after that, in 60, he was done after 60. So I would replace him with Kirk Reeder. He's the all-time winningest left-hander in San Francisco history, and I certainly think he deserves a spot. I also think that Jason Schmidt probably deserves to have a shot, and Jimmy Davenport. Overall, he was, I think, as good a third baseman as anybody for the Giants in the early years. He got on base. He was an excellent fielder, and he was, he played that position for pretty much 10 years consecutively. Jim Ray Hart came along and spelled him, but I think Davenport and Brandon Crawford, like you mentioned, Gary, and Kirk Reeder and Jason Schmidt should be on there. So,
well, originally, I had included a list of 25 honorable mentions, which my publisher chose to eliminate because they didn't want the book to be too long. But Davenport and Schmidt were both on that original list of honorable mentions that I had.
Still no Kirk Reeder, though. That's all right.
Well, Russ, just as far as Antonelli goes, it's a franchise book, so it could be considered that he did, that Robert picked him more for being on New York Giants. I just said both because those were the two, Mays and Antonelli,
Yeah.
the two players who actually played in both cities. So,
Well, when you were talking about the two guys, I figured it was going to be Antonelli, but even 4 years in New York and 4 years in San Francisco, I don't know. I think there's guys better than him.
well, you might have a problem right now, Russ, because Jim Mully is the Johnny Antonelli fan club president.
No, I know.
Jim, go ahead.
Okay, full disclosure, I'm a Giants fan because when I was about 6 years old, my father brought me home Johnny's autograph, and that was my first major league autograph. I got to meet Johnny later. I had lunch with him several times and breakfast. And so I would rank him number two right behind Mays. But yeah, so I mean, I still run around 60 years later wearing a Johnny Antonelli jersey when I go watch the Giants and play. But um, the one thing I would say about the chapter on Johnny, and I ran right out and bought the book when I found out Johnny made the top 50 and turned right to that and read that chapter. And I just want to say it just struck me as a little dark. Talked about look, he was resented when he signed with the Braves because of the large the bonus, and he was 18 years old and he got a $50,000 bonus, and there were people on that team like Spahn and Sane who were making way less, and yeah, there was a resentment. And then when he went to the Giants, it was a trade for Bobby Thompson, and there are people who resented that he traded for Bobby Thompson. I would mention later, though, that when Bobby Thompson came back to the Giants, he was Johnny Antonelli's roommate, and those two became great friends. So, in the lines about vilified by Giants fans, disrespected by the coaching staff, and it was darker than I thought it should have been. I mean, just want to say Johnny was beloved in Rochester. There's a wonderful biography of him by Scott Petoniak, who's been on our Zoom call before, describes him, his self-deprecating humor, humble guy. He didn't know if Scott didn't know if Johnny would do the book, but he said he graciously accepted, described him as devoted husband and family man, enjoys kibitzing with friends, family and grandchildren. He says he owes everything to baseball. I've had lunch with him. I've talked to Johnny. He's a real gentleman. He's beloved in Rochester. And just to the extent that when you finished reading your chapter, I just cringed a little bit saying, wow, it describes him as being kind of a grumpy, hated guy. And I can just tell you, he's beloved in Rochester, and he was a real gentleman. And I just don't want people to get that impression of him because he's a good guy. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Let's go to Norm Coleman.
I think we can somehow get Kirk Reeder on this list and kick somebody else off. Let's keep Antonelli right there. Robert, this is a lot of fun. I'm going to have one question, but I just want to let you know that my list and your list is not that different. Mays 1, Bonds 2, Mathewson 3, Marichal 4, we matched there. But I got McCovey 6, Hubble 7, I've got Kent 8, not 11, Clark 9, not 13. And I told Bill before I only had 10 written down, and I did, but I had a spreadsheet also where I had more, and I did have Ott at 11, and you have him at 5. We have two major differences here, and that is my number 6 and my number 10. I have Buster Posey at number 6. He is the guiding force behind 3 World Series championships. He's Steve's number 1 pick for the Hall of Fame, and now he runs the Giants. I think he belongs in the top 10. And number 10, I believe the greatest pitcher in postseason and World Series history should be in the top 10, and that's Madison Bumgarner. I mean, maybe his career as far as regular season does not rank up with the rest, but in terms of what he did in the postseason, I don't see how we could forget him. But I do have a question for you that is a little bit off the wall, because I am curious, since you're a Yankee fan. Which players in the Giants top 10 would make your Yankee top 10 if we were combining the Yankees and the Giants?
Oh my,
Johnny Mize.
nice.
That's a very interesting question. Well, first, let me say you mentioned Bumgarner and Posey being in your top 10. I think that's a little high, but they definitely would have been higher if I had formulated my rankings a couple of years later. I'm not sure how high they'd be, probably in the top 20. But I think the top 10 is a little bit high. Now, as far as who would make the Yankees top 10, I think Mays would probably be second to Ruth. My Yankees top 10, by the way, was this was before Aaron Judge became a star. So my Yankees top 10 was Ruth, Gehrig, DiMaggio, Mantle, Berra, Jeter was 6, Mariano was 7. I think I had Whitey Ford and Bill Dickey, and then Don Mattingly I had at 10 for all he meant to the team for that when he was there. Now I think Mays would be probably number 2 if you combine them. Bonds, because a lot of what he accomplished was the use of steroids, I would have him probably behind Mantle on that list. I'd probably have him at number 6, with Mays being 2, Gehrig 3, DiMaggio 4, Mantle 5, and Bond 6. Mathewson would probably be 7. Marichal might squeeze into the top 10. It would be close because I think I put him ahead of Whitey Ford and probably Bill Dickey. I don't think I put him ahead of maybe Jeter too. I'm not sure, but he wouldn't make it ahead of Berra, I don't think. So you probably have 3 or 4 of those Giants would make it into the Yankees, would make it into combined top 10, I would think.
That's very good. I think we're on the same page on everything except for Posey and Bumgarner.
Left out Jack Clark.
He made it into top 50.
Oh, he did. Okay.
Yes.
Before we go to Harvey, Ken, Will Clark was 13, Jack Clark 35.
Oh, thank you.
Harvey, you're up.
2 quick comments. I don't know about ranking anybody. Willie's number 1 and everybody's after him. Barbara, I wanted to tell you that my dad, I was born in Brooklyn, raised in the Bronx. So naturally I was a Giants fan. And my dad was a Giants fan, and Mel Ott was his favorite player. And like Mars, there you go, Mars. My dad would imitate Mel's right leg kick, and but he advised me not to try it. And the other comment, I was lucky enough to have had a number of wonderful meetings, dinners with Bobby Thompson, and Bobby was particularly insistent that when he was traded to Milwaukee for Johnny Antonelli, that was the key trade that gave the Giants the World Series in 1954.
That's right.
So, Jim, I would add to what you're saying that the Giants don't win in 1954 without Johnny Antonelli. And if you're going to discuss the worth of a guy like Madison Bumgarner, who breathtakingly wonderful in the postseason, I don't care what his regular season record was. He's responsible for World Series wins. And that's the idea of the tournament. Every year we play a tournament, and one team finishes with the final victory. And Madison Bumgarner belongs up there. Johnny Antonelli gave us the last World Series championship here in New York, and he is most worthy of being on anybody's list of top 10, 12, 15, 50 Giants. I enjoyed this discussion. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Harvey.
Agree.
By the way, if anybody wants to know if Robert wrote a book on their favorite team other than the Giants, could be football, raise your hand and you could ask Robert. And if you root for another team and he wrote the book, like on the Red Sox, he'll give you the top 10 on them or the Cardinals,
Mets?
whatever it is.
The
Yeah.
Mets?
Yes, Robert, you did one on the Mets, right?
Actually, I'm in the process of doing one on the Mets right
There you
now.
go, Hindi.
All right.
It's actually going to be released next spring.
Is Tom Seaver number one?
Yes, Tom Seaver's number one.
Good.
Are you happy, Hindi?
I am.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to ask the group.
Robert,
I was-
try to sit back just a bit. There, so we see. There we go. That's good.
Okay. Yeah, one thing I wanted to ask the group is what were your feelings on Bobby Bonds? And since you were all Giant fans at the time, how did you feel when the Giants traded Bonds for Bobby Mercer?
Bad mistake.
He was my favorite growing up. Him and Chris Spire and McCovey. Mays was, just about done at that time. But Bobby Bonds, I loved how he played the field. I love how he threw, stole bases. He struck out. I remember this 189 times. Now today, people are striking out over 215 times. So I was very upset that they got Bobby Mercer for him. That's my opinion, anyway.
Another bad trade was Gary Matthews, was a terrific player.
Can I say something about Bobby Bonds?
Yes, you can.
I love Bobby Bonds. He's number 19 on my list. I was at his first game when he hit the grand slam off of John Purdon. And from that point, and I was at the game where he and Mays collided in right center field. Watching him play right field to me was just about, maybe slightly not up to the level, but just about comparable with watching Clemente play right field, especially when they were run into the corner for the line drive in the corner and would scoop the ball with the grace of a ballerina and turn and fire that ball on a line to third base. No one could do it like those two. And the way he ran the bases, Bobby Bonds was a great player, and that trade for Mercer was a mockery of a sham. If Bonds had stayed with the Giants his entire career, I think he would have ended up being a Hall of Famer.
What about Gary Matthews? That was another bad trade.
Well, I like to talk about Bobby. I agree with Norm. He was a fabulous player, but the trade was, I think, kind of expected because he just, he hadn't reached what everybody thought he was going to be. And then I think his personal issues with alcohol was the thing that, the Giants felt that they had to get him while he had some value before he just drank himself out of the game.
Right.
And I agree that Mercer was a real disappointment. And what Mars was saying, the outfield that had Gary Maddox in center, Gary Matthews in left, and Bobby Bonds in right, there was no better outfield in baseball during that particular time. They could have had two guys play the outfield and had to bring in a fifth infielder because all those guys had great speed. So Bobby Bonds is a great player. His personal demons drove him out, and he's kind of a precursor of the modern player. Home runs and a lot of strikeouts.
That's right.
Robert, one thing I will say, Norm and I were at Willie Mays' celebration of life last July, and Barry Bonds was there. And, people are going up to him, telling him how great he is. I went up to him and I just said one thing to him. I said, Barry, I loved your dad. And that was it. Because that's how I felt. Bobby Bonds, the original number 25. So
What was his response?
he just looks through people a lot of times, and just he smiled, but I wasn't there to laud him. I was there to laud his father, because his father was one of the main reasons, other than my father wanting to be like my dad and rooting for the Giants. The first guys I rooted for was Bobby Bonds. He was a five-tool player. He really was.
He was.
So,
Well, when Norm and I were at the premiere of the movie in San Francisco, Say Hey, and we were upstairs, and I went over to Bonds, and kind of like what she a different comment, but I kept what I said to Bonds is I said, you look great, because he was back to being about 6'1", 190, because I read he was an avid cyclist. He looked terrific. So I left baseball out of it. I just told him he looked great.
Dixie, you're up.
Thank you. I would guess, an educated guess maybe, that if there were beings on Mars or Venus, that they would guess that Mays and Seaver would top those two lists of teams. There would be no ifs, ands, or buts about it. As an interloper here amongst Giants, dyed-in-the-wool Giants fans, I have a couple of questions. The first one is, uh, I'm wondering who just missed the list and why. The one or two guys that you really labored over putting them on the list or not putting them on the list. And the other question is, does Don Mueller did he play long enough to get an honorable mention?
Don Mueller's on the list, Dixie.
On the list.
Oh, he is.
On the
Oh,
list.
Mueller
Don
made the
Mueller's on
list.
the list.
Mueller is number
I'm glad
4.
that Jeff Tesro's on the list too.
Dixie, 46, Don Mueller.
Okay, thank you. Well, and I'm glad that Jeff Tesro made it. Now, who were the one or two guys that just missed it by a hair, and why did they miss?
You know something? It was a while ago that I wrote the book. It would be hard for me to remember exactly who just missed making the list. I know that Jason Schmidt was one of the honorable mentions. He was pretty close to making it. I'm not sure exactly where he was. I'm trying to remember some of the others offhand.
Johnny Mize?
Mize is there.
On the list.
On the
Johnny
list.
Oh,
Mize
yes.
is on the list.
Oh,
I have
good.
him ranked at number 15. Johnny Mize. Yeah, I really couldn't tell you offhand who would be high on that list of honorable mentions.
What about
for the-
Willard Marshall, Walker Cooper, them?
No, Walker Cooper, no.
No,
No.
Walker Cooper had probably most of his best years with the Cardinals, I think.
Yeah.
Not 1947 when I was born.
Mhm.
He was the greatest catcher in the National League that year.
Yeah.
for the
That's true.
Giants.
Yeah, it's hard for me to remember. One player I did want to discuss a little bit further, though, was Monty Irvin, who I feel is one of the more overlooked, outstanding players ever play the game.
I
He
think
had
you
most
had
of
him
the,
at 45.
excuse me?
Did you have him at 45?
Yes.
Yeah, only because he had his best years playing in the Negro Leagues.
Right.
Prior to when he first began playing in the Negro Leagues in the late 1930s, Giants knew about him and they came close. They seriously considered signing him, but Horace Stoneham later said that he was afraid to take the chance of creating turmoil within the owners. But Monty Irvin, when he was playing in the Negro Leagues, was considered to be a superior talent to Jackie Robinson, and most of the Negro League players felt that he would have been a better choice to integrate the game. He played a lot of shortstop in the Negro Leagues, but he also played the outfield, and he was a true five-tool player. Who Roy Campanella, who competed against him in the Negro League, later said was the finest all-around player he ever saw. So that tells you something about how good Monty Irvin was, and if he had come to the major leagues a few years earlier, he would have been ranked probably in the top 10 or 12 on this list. But the fact that he didn't come to the Giants until he was 30 years old prevented him from being acknowledged as one of the great players in the history of the game. But his name never appears close to these top 100 lists, but he would have been considered one of the great all-time players had he played in the major leagues earlier in his career.
Thank you. Wayne Schaefer, did you want to say something? I think your hand went up. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I
Go
wanted to
ahead.
say, first of all, hello to everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm not familiar with this, the yellow hands, how to do that. I guess I'll eventually learn. But I just wanted to, throw in my 2 cents about Mel Ott in particular. I was growing up in the 60s. I was an avid reader, and I loved to read about baseball. And I just happened to get a biography about Mel Ott, and I became intrigued by it. It was like one of these biographies you get as a 12-year-old kid or whatever. And I was just really interested in, the hitting stance and the short porch and everything. And being a left-handed hitter who still plays, in fact, and I'll just give the pitch right now. It's every Sunday during the season at what used to be called Jewel Avenue Park. Now it's called, I think, Utopia Playground. It's on the corner of, I think, 69th Street and Utopia Parkway in Queens. Whoever wants to go. The age range is about from 14 to about 82, and it's a competitive game. Men, women, everything, everybody. And I know the commissioner, as we call him, would love to see whoever shows up. But getting back to Mel, now when the subject comes up, it gives me a, particularly warm feeling to hear that he was only 5'10" or 5'9" and 170 pounds, which is basically what I am now. Of course, there was a time not too long ago where I was an inch taller and about 40 pounds lighter, so I wouldn't recommend the same path to 5'10", 170 that I took. But, I'll kind of direct this towards Barbara. Every year when I've been playing with these guys, probably about 4 years. So, I try to put a uniform together, for the coming season. And so it just so happened by hook or by crook, I'll just show you the uniform I put together. And I didn't plan this. I just happen to have this here. So once the spring rolls around, I will be wearing this. I don't know if you can see
Oh,
it.
wow. That looks awesome.
There we go.
I have
Yeah.
one too, but mine is blue over scarlet from the 1940s,
That's
and
what
it's
this
number
is.
4 Melot.
Right, that's what this is. And just to
Oh,
tell
it
you a
is.
great story, and again, not to laud too much the virtues of eBay, but that's actually the second version of that jersey I bought. The first one I bought, and this is the downside of eBay, I loved it. It looked great. But when I put it on, it didn't love me, if you know what I mean. It's a little on
Well,
the
I would
small
just
side.
like to say that I have one too, with a 4 on the back.
Right. So my son has that one, okay, who also shows up. So you may actually, if you show up on a given Sunday, you may see not one but two Melots out in the field.
I've
Thank
got
you,
a
Wayne.
Thank
I've
you,
got a
guys.
Bill
I appreciate
Terry
it.
Ken
and a Carl
Hogarty,
Hubbard.
you're up.
Thank you, Robert. Good presentation. I was just curious, and maybe this would be a question I could pose for everybody, but you did the top 50, but I'd be interested in how you would rank it by position. If it was just the 9 starters, no DH, I'm old school, maybe one starter and one relief pitcher. I was thinking, for example, you had Frisch at 10 and Kent at 11, and my prejudice would be that that's right. Frisch should be playing second, but first base would be interesting, and a few other positions would be really interesting too. So I wonder if you gave any thoughts of who would be your starting 9 on the team from your selections, because I think sometimes it's relative to their areas. You can't just go by stats and things like that. Ken had 5 good years, incredible years RBI wise, but I wonder if that had something to do with the era too, compared to some of the New York Giants and things like that. So I would be curious in who your top 9 would be, your position players. And I wonder also, well, I guess I'll just leave it at that. I guess the other question would be, when you compiled the list, I assume you probably had some assumptions going in. Was there one player that really surprised you that you rated much higher than you would have before you started? Thank you.
Well, whenever I do these rankings, I always have, as you said, I always have some kind of idea who's going to be on my list, but the rankings do change as I do my research. And I also usually add a couple of players, usually older players who I'm not that familiar with. So a player like Jeff Tesreau, pitcher during the second decade of the 20th century, he moved up considerably on my list. I didn't know that much about him before I began my research, and I realized that for a few years he was a dominant pitcher in the National League. Now, regarding your other question, I do at the end of the book have I do list my starting lineup and starting pitching staff for both New York and San Francisco Giants separately and together. So, if you don't mind, I'll run through those right now.
Go ahead.
I have my New York Giants starting lineup. I have George Burns in left field leading off. I have Frankie Fish at second base, batting second. Bill Terry at first base, batting third. Willie Mays in center field, batting fourth. Mel Ott in right field, batting fifth. Freddie Lindstrom at third base, batting sixth. Travis Jackson at shortstop, batting seventh. And Roger Bresnahan catching and batting eighth. This is before the DH, so I didn't include a DH on this. My New York Giants pitching staff is Christy Mathewson, Carl Hubble, Joe McGinnity, Al Schumacher, Jeff Tesreau with my starters. My setup man was Hooks Wilsey, and my closer was Hoyt Wilhelm. Hoyt Wilhelm, by the way, to answer the earlier question, he was one of my honorable mentions. He was very close to making the top 50. Now, San Francisco Giants starting lineup. I had Bobby Bonds in right field batting leadoff, Buster Posey catching, batting second, Barry Bonds in left field batting third, Willie Mays in center field batting fourth, Willie McCovey at first base batting fifth, Jeff Kent at second base batting sixth, Matt Williams at third base batting seventh, and Rich Aurelia at shortstop batting eighth. It was tough to leave Orlando Cepeda off that, but to him and McCovey, I had to give the edge to McCovey. My San Francisco Giants pitching staff was Juan Marichal, Gaylord Perry, Madison Bumgarner, Tim Lincecum, Jason Schmidt, and my relievers were Rod Beck and Rob Nen. Now, my combined starting lineup for both New York and San Francisco, I had Frankie Fish at second base leading off, Travis Jackson at shortstop batting second, Barry Bonds in left field batting third, Willie Mays in center field batting fourth, Willie McCovey at first base batting fifth, Mel Ott in right field batting sixth, Matt Williams at third base batting seventh, and Buster Posey catching batting eighth. If I had it to do over again, I might switch Buster Posey to second and drop Travis Jackson to eighth. My pitching staff was Christy Mathewson, Juan Marichal, Carl Hubble, Joe McGinnity, Gaylord Perry, and then Rod Beck and Rob Nen were my relievers. And if I had that to do over again, I might insert Madison Bumgarner ahead of Gaylord Perry.
That might be a great game to play between those two teams because they always said Mays was the only one who might have caught some of the balls he hit.
Robert, the one omission that I mentioned earlier, Brandon Crawford. My question to you is the extra list. I forgot what the honorable mention. You know, when you were reading over those pictures, is Gary Lavelle anywhere there?
I'm not sure, but I don't think so.
Okay, because I thought he was terrific also. So
Yeah, he
that's
was.
just
Yeah, he has a Giants record for most games pitched.
he was a terrific lefty. Paul Ellis Graham, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was. Well, it was a comment about Barry Bonds a while ago. So,
do you want to make your comment?
Yeah, my memory of Barry. I was living in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and we had the Eastern League with the Red Sox, and there, and the San Francisco still had a minor league team in Springfield, and so Barry comes in, and Barry hits a grand slam, and I remember looking at my scorebook and saying, "Holy cow, this guy's going to be something." He was terrific.
Thank you, Paul. Robert, you got time for three more?
Sure.
Wonderful. Charles, you're up.
Yeah, no, I was going to marry Gary Lavelle, but also, thank you, Gary, because he has the SF Giants record for games pitched.
Who is that?
Gary Lavelle.
Oh,
the reliever. And not a lot of people know that. So, but he does have the SF Giants record for games pitched. And then he was a lefty, and his righty counterpart was Randy Moffett, who was Billie Jean King's brother.
Yep.
All right.
Number 46, Gary Lavelle. Mr. Ment, Greg Prince.
Thanks very much, Gary. Hey, Robert, I was wondering, in the course of doing your research, was there a player whose story or whose life maybe you didn't know that much about, who you kind of fell in love with, that regardless of where they ranked, you just found yourself thinking, wow, what a career, what a life. I really didn't know that.
Well, I admired Monty Irvin very much as a human being. I thought he was a great person. But as far as their lives, well, Iron Man Joe McGinnity, the thing that surprised me about him was that he continued to pitch professionally for about another 25 or 30 years after he left the game. He was pitching in various leagues. So he was basically pitching into his early 50s, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. Um, let's see.
I can mention an unheralded pitcher. It's at the time. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Robert's trying to finish.
Okay.
Yeah, another one was Jeff Tesreau. What I found very interesting about him was that he had been a dominant pitcher for the Giants. Then one winter, John McGraw, the Giants manager, asked him to take some of the other Giant players south with him to on a conditioning program during the off season. And he agreed to do that. But then when he refused to tell McGraw what they were doing at nights, that put him in the doghouse with Don McGraw, and he only lasted another year or two before you let him go. That basically his nobility and his loyalty to his teammates prevented him from pitching many more years. I thought that was really interesting. And then Frankie Frisch, I was not a big fan of him personally because he later on became a member of the Veterans Committee, where he helped usher into the Hall of Fame several of his former teammates who were undeserving players like Dave Bancroft and a lot of his old teammates who were good players but not really deserving to be in the Hall of Fame. But he actually had most of his best seasons for the St. Louis Cardinals as a leader of the Gas House Gang after he left New York. So he was another fascinating figure.
Is it fair to assume John McGraw is the all-time manager here? Did Bruce Bochy come into consideration?
I think considering the number of years of service he put in, I think it had to put McGraw at number one.
Okay, thank you very much.
We're gonna finish up with Ed and then Norm. I'll make a few comments and we'll go from there. Ed, you're up.
Yeah, I'm just going to mention one name I don't think I've heard mentioned as one of my favorites was Matt Cain.
He was one of those honorable mentions. Yes, now that you mentioned the name, he was pretty high up on that list of
honorable mention anyway. Too bad he couldn't make a sandwich, but you know what I'm talking about? He cut his hand making
the mayonnaise, though. He had the mayonnaise.
Before we go to Norm, Robert.
Yes.
Harvey is a huge New York Giants football fan. Do you have your list of the 10 football giants for him?
Yes.
Can you give us your top 10 New York football giants from your book?
I will try to remember. Let me see. Well, number one was obviously Lawrence Taylor.
You bet.
Number two, I believe I had
Gifford?
No, I don't think he was as good as they make him out to be. He was a glamour guy. No, I think number two was Evelyn Tennell.
Yep,
number 45.
Yeah,
and I was amazed when the NFL Network did a ranking of the 10 greatest Giants players. He wasn't even on the list, which I thought was ridiculous. Three was Roosevelt Brown. Three and four were like a toss-up between Roosevelt Brown and Mel Hein. Five was Michael Strahan. Six was Harry Carson, who was one of my personal favorites, great leader. Seven is Eli Manning. 8, I believe I had Andy Robustelli. 9, I think I had Frank Gifford.
Okay.
And 10 was close. I think I had Phil Simms at 10, just ahead of Sam Huff.
There you go.
You're
Harvey. There you go,
heavy,
Harvey. Love you.
heavy on the defense. That's what it should be.
How about
All right.
Y.A. Tittle? He led them to three championships.
No, defense wins.
Wyatt Tittle was in the top 20. I think I had him just behind Tarkenton, who accomplished more with much less.
Charlie Connolly.
Connolly was a good one.
Yeah.
He was in the top 50.
Norm, why don't
Connolly
you,
was in the top
Norm,
50.
take us home.
Okay. There's one name that didn't come up. I'm wondering why, and maybe it's because he pitched in the 1800s. But Tim Keith has not come up here, and he was dominant in the 1880s for the Giants.
Yeah, actually, I did in my introduction. I indicated that I was excluding people who played prior to 1900. So there were actually a few other great Giant players who competed during the 1800s that I excluded. Buck Ewing, who was a great catcher during the 1880s and 1890s, he was excluded. George Davis, the shortstop. Tim Keefe and Welch. They had a pitcher named Welch. I can't remember
Mickey
his first
Welch,
name.
yeah.
Mickey Welch.
Mickey.
Yeah, Mickey Welch. And Amos Russi was another one.
Yeah.
So there were about a 6 or 7 1800 players who would have been in the top 50 had I included them as well.
Robert, do you got time for 2 more quickies?
Sure.
Steve and then Russ.
Only because it has something to do with today. You know, Lou Gehrig, we all know, had such a tragic life. The day he hit the 4 home runs, it wasn't a sports headline. Does anybody know what the headline was that day?
Yes.
John McGraw dies.
That's
I believe.
Who said it, Norm?
Yeah.
I figures. Okay.
What was it?
John McGraw died on the same day that Gehrig hit the 4 home runs.
All right, Russ, you're going to be it.
Yeah, it was not Matt Williams with the sandwich. It was Jeremy Affeldt.
Not Matt Cain, Jeremy Affeld.
Yeah.
All right.
Cain was making a sandwich?
Before we say goodnight to Robert, this is for Renee. Robert, you're concluding your Met book. Is Willie Mays anywhere in that, or is that
No. I like I said, I only include the players' years with that team. So
That's what I figured you'd say, but I had to ask you. And a special shout out again to Barbara Ott-Schneider for joining us tonight. But let's all give it up for Robert Cohen. Robert, fascinating night, a great debate. So besides your Met book, what do we have to look forward to?
Well, for the New York fans, I'm actually going right after I finish with the Mets book. I'm going to do a 50 Greatest New York Knicks book.
All right.
Oh, I'd like to hear that one. That's a good one.
That will be coming out in the winter of 2026.
Wonderful.
So
and I
you're-
know Howard Manis is a huge Ranger fan. Any interest in doing something
Yes.
on the Rangers?
Yeah, eventually I want to do one on the Rangers too. I'm trying to think of this. If any of you are San Francisco fans, I did a book on the 49ers. That came out a few years ago. If any of you are just interested in baseball history, I've also done books on, I said the Reds. I have a Cincinnati Reds book that is coming out in a matter of weeks. In the past, I've also done books on the Dodgers, Cubs,
Cardinals.
Yes, Phillies, Yankees, Red Sox, Tigers, and Indians.
Okay, thanks.
And in football, I've done books on the Giants, Cowboys, Eagles, Packers, Bears, Lions' book is coming out this year. Vikings. And one of my more interesting books, which I, for some reason, never sold that much, but I think it's one of my more interesting books, is the 50 Most Dynamic Duos in Sports History, which came out a few years back. That covers the 4 sports of baseball, football, basketball, and hockey.
Robert, when you do the Nick book, there's always been a debate who is number 1, Frazier or Willis. And I'm interested to see who you're going to decide is number 1. It's probably 1, 2, one way or the other. But
I've already formulated my top 10 rankings, and I have Frazier at number 1. Now Willis, I love, and if I was starting a team, I would take him ahead of Patrick Ewing. But
me too.
Ewing had numbers that were so far superior. I had to put Ewing at number 2. Willis would be number 3, and my own personal favorite, Dave DeBusschere, would be number 4.
Wonderful. Robert, where could they get this? or any of your other books? Amazon is the best place?
Amazon, they're all available on Amazon. The current one, the Reds, is going to be available in bookstores in a couple of weeks, and any future books will be available in bookstores. But the older ones are all available on Amazon
Wonderful.
and Barnes and Noble.
Thank you so much for joining us. Let's give Robert another round of applause. Please, Robert, don't be a stranger. Come join us. Great bunch of guys and gals here, and you made tonight a really special night. So, for the rest of you, we will be meeting next Wednesday when Richard Quickey talks about Malad. So, hope to see everybody next Wednesday. I'm going to shut the recording off, and if anybody wants to talk a little bit about the Giants for a few minutes, we'll hang out here. But have a great night, everybody. And again, thanks for those who reached out to me. Much appreciated. Good night, everybody.
Thank you for having me, Gary.
Thank you.
Robert,
Rob.
thanks so much.